Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about the future of AI and self-driving cars. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, Product Innovation and Value Creation Expert, and I'll be your host. And I have a very special guest with me. Hi, Jim.
Hello, hello.
I'm so happy to see you here. Jim Harris is a global keynote speaker and author, and I'm sure we're going to have really an interesting talk. And we're going to talk about AI, which is a subject that we all talk about in the last few months for sure. And now we can start. We're live on YouTube and Facebook and in LinkedIn, and you are so much invited to join the discussion and invite other people to join. And now we can start. So the first thing I want to talk about is the future of transportation. We heard about transportation like 2 3 years back. It was like this, everybody talked about the autonomous cars, but now we're talking about it less. So how do you see that future?
Well, first off, to say right now, Tesla is worth more than 17 traditional car companies combined. And so, if you don't think electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles are going to change the $10 trillion a year transportation market, then the graph that I show of that is really for you. I mean, that is a head spinning statistic for me. And I look at these valuations, and I've been looking at these valuations since about 2017, when really Tesla was below the radar for traditional car companies. They dismissed EVs as irrelevant. And yet, when we look at it, when we look at Tesla just recently being able to drop its price of its cars by 20%, we can see that it can really drive the entire market. And by doing that, Tesla's actually saying, we want to make it unprofitable for other car companies really to come into this space. They're in a very competitive market in China, and they want market share. And that very aggressive pricing move puts pressure on their really intense competitors in China. So we're seeing a rapid evolution of this market. And what is driving it is an exponentially declining cost curve on lithium ion batteries. The price of lithium ion batteries has fallen 90% since 2010.
Wow.
So it's like Moore's law, compute power doubles in power every 18 months, staying at the same price point. Well, it's the same kind of law with lithium ion batteries. And so anything that is driven by technology can decline in cost, can disrupt industries, and ultimately can be deflationary. And this is a very important point, because the cost of cars has remained constant for 100 years when adjusted for inflation at 70 cents a mile. But once we have autonomous vehicles, so think about Uber and Lyft, but with no driver, the cost per mile drops to 25 cents per mile. That's a 66% decline in cost. So who's going to buy a car when you can get a car anywhere, anytime to take you to any point? You don't have to worry about oil changes or finding a parking spot or insurance or getting a ticket, anything.
Yeah, like I've been in AI. It was an AI and voice conference like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and they talked about all the downsides or maybe obstacles that self-driving cars have, especially within like small cities and not in highways, mainly where you have lots of pedestrians. And do you think that people are more willing to drive these cars today, or is it more reliable today than it was like 4 or 5 years ago?
So first off, the thing to start with is to get an understanding of the big picture. And in North America, 45,000 people are killed every year in car accidents. And 94% of car accidents are due to driver error. 94%, Addie.
Right.
And when you look at people who are maimed, permanently injured for the rest of their lives, it's 2.5 million. Now, those figures are just for North America. And yet, what happens is when any AI has a problem and there's a car accident and a death, that's all we read about in the media. But we never read about the 45,000 people who are killed. And so autonomous vehicles will save globally millions of lives every single year. The global figure on deaths due to car accidents is 2.5 million. 2.5 million people every year being saved. So yes, this gets headlines, and people have watched the Terminator, the movie Terminator with
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. So people are scared, and Hollywood jumps on this. But really, when you look at it, look at the data, and Tesla cars have 85% fewer accidents per million miles traveled. 85% less accidents per million miles traveled. We have to look at the big picture data, not these scary single points of data that the media serve up to us.
Yeah, I think that it's related to the fact that people want to embrace technology, but they're a bit scared that they will not have any control. So I think it's more psychological than really. It's not that they think about the numbers. They're just aware
Yes.
of the fact that they are not holding the wheel. So they're very frightened.
But you've already been in vehicles where you don't, there's nobody holding the wheel. Like you've been in a plane and they have autopilot.
Right.
I've been on trains in airports that run they shuttle you between different points, and there's no driver. Now it's an automated system. It takes me from terminal A to terminal B, but there's no driver there. I
Right.
was in a friend's car. It was an Alfa Romeo, an Italian car, and he had an autonomous braking feature. So, in other words, if you come up suddenly on something and you don't realize it, it will stop for you. And the person in front of us jammed on their brakes. Maybe a squirrel ran across the road or something, and stopped so suddenly, and we stopped and did not hit him. Now think about that. Was a $700 feature, but what it did is it saved him $3,000 in fender bender damage and
Yeah.
a mark on his insurance. So when we begin to use these technologies, we find what the benefits are of technology. And, I think we're here on StreamYard, but Zoom has been a huge, explosively adopted technology during the pandemic. And in 1980, a phone call from Toronto to Tel Aviv, adjusted for inflation, would be $10 US a minute, right? But
Right.
here
Right.
we are on StreamYard for 45 minutes for free. So look at the
Yeah.
huge deflationary impact that technology has. So we have to embrace technology and we have to embrace innovation because they're deflationary. And we are living, because of the huge global spending on COVID, we're living in the highest inflationary period in 40 years. So we will see a more rapid adoption of technology and innovation because they are hugely deflationary.
So can we just imagine what would be the future? You mentioned that people would not have a private car, that somebody would just come, somebody, it's not a somebody, it's a car. It's a car coming, taking you wherever you want. Even families would not have cars. Like I can just imagine, in Israel, we have lots of kids and lots of families. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, that in the weekend, you need a big car. So what would be the future as you see it?
So the future comes piece by piece. So in the US, there are 70 million households that have a second or more car. And hello, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I think it's the light.
Okay.
Oh.
Wow. That was interesting. Anyways, there are 70 million households that have a second or more car. And what happens when those households say, we're going to keep our primary car, but we're going to give up the secondary one? In fact, we just did that during the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we had two cars, and we used to drive 30,000 kilometers a year between the two of them. And then the pandemic hit, and we were driving 4,000 kilometers a year. So we
Yeah.
said, why do we need two cars? And the answer is, you don't. So we gave one away. So what happens when 70 million households realize they can get rid of one car? What happens to sales for the US auto industry, for the gas powered car industry? It's going to fall off a cliff. So
Yeah.
we're going to put our toe in the water. But here's the thing. I go out to the airport quite a lot to fly different places, and it is cheaper for me to take an Uber or a Lyft than it is to drive out there and park for 3 days and then come back. So why would I want a second car if it's more expensive and more inconvenient? Because when the Uber or Lyft takes me, I get dropped right off in front of the check-in gate. Whereas with parking, I have to find a parking spot, drive round and round. There's 1,000 cars out there. There are no parking spots. It is more convenient and cheaper and easier. So when you have those kind of conditions, the market moves.
Yeah. So what you're saying, we'll basically have an Uber without drivers. And then at least some of us would say, okay, in many cases, it's better to use that instead of having my own car, paying insurance to take care of the cars, garage, whatever. So that more or less.
So there's a saying, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So for you near Tel Aviv, you were working with Waze before most people knew about Waze. You were
Right.
seeing the huge benefit of Waze before the rest of the world knew. In Phoenix, Arizona, Waymo is running a driverless taxi pilot program that's been running for 5 years, and they just doubled the area that it covers. So the future is already here. It's just not here for everyone yet. So driverless vehicles aren't here in Toronto yet, but they are. If you go to Phoenix, take one and you'll see, wow, this is great. It's less expensive. It's very convenient. Boom.
Yeah, yesterday I saw this very funny video. Maybe you stumbled upon it. Two older guys, they were like 80, and their grandkid, I think she is like 20 something. She took them with an autonomous car and they drove. Did you see that? And they're so like amazed, and they're like in the back seat shouting all the time. I can't believe it. A junction, a junction. They were so happy and afraid. It was an amazing video. Just imagine that.
So we have wrestled with technology. This is not the first technology revolution. My grandmother was born in 1900, and the telephone was pretty exciting back in 1900. We had telegraphs, right? And, telephone calls were very expensive. And you only called your grandparents on Sunday at 9 p.m. so they'd be there, and you'd just talk quickly and
Yeah.
then hang. It was all very planned. But now we pay no attention to phone calls. I mean, here we're having a video call for 45 minutes and not even thinking about the cost. So what technology does is it changes the nature of society. It changes the way we interact. And think about the thousands upon thousands of workers who were on switchboards, who, when a call came in, they'd take a plug from one place and put it in another place. And that's how they connected the phone calls. There
Yeah.
were thousands of people employed that way. And of course, today it's all switched automatically. There's no people patching cables in. So everything changes. Jobs change, how we use the technology, the cost of the technology.
Yeah. So what you're saying that we'll have less drivers, either private or in public sector or truck drivers, so on. So can we imagine what would that impact and the impact of AI in general? We cannot like not see that. How would that change our daily lives as you see it? Or the jobs market, for example?
Well, the World Economic Forum just came out with a report 2 weeks ago on the future of jobs. And there are some really interesting insights. All your listeners should go look at this report. It was done in conjunction with Accenture. But 25% of all jobs are going to fundamentally change. There's going to be something like 70 million new jobs created as a result of the AI revolution. And this report believes maybe 89 million jobs going to be eliminated. Things that we can automate with AI. For instance, Adi, we could be having a real-time transcription of our podcast right now. You know, years ago, you'd have somebody sitting at a computer listening to it and then keying it in. Whereas now that transcription can be automatic. So what happens to that transcription job? Well, was it a really exciting job to begin with? No, not really.
Yeah,
Although listening to this podcast, they'd be, oh,
for sure, they
I
enjoy
am
it.
so glad to be transcribing this podcast. This is
For sure.
fascinating. But
You're right.
but really, um, so everything changes, right? How are companies going to evolve? How are people going to change? And one of the interesting insights from this report is we need to invest heavily in training, education, upskilling. So when everything is changing, as individuals need to take responsibility for our future, for our education. Are we always learning? And companies need to invest more heavily in training and education. A few years back, I think it was the 2020 report, the World Economic Forum said every single person needs 20 more days of training and education. More. That implies we're already doing some. This is
Yeah.
20 days more. So one of the questions for listeners is, are you investing 20 days every single year in your education, reading, thinking, listening, applying it to your company, your organizations, your processes?
I know that most of your public speaking is in front of enterprise and big companies. And I wonder, how do you see them coping with so much change? As like big companies are usually really slow, they're not changing that fast, they're not innovating. And now you have this revolution, which is so fast. When you talk to them, are they in panic, or how do you see them relating to that?
Well, yeah, they're on the panic spectrum in different places, but I work with an organization called Exponential Organizations. Salim wrote this. This is the new book with Peter. And EXOs grow 10 times as fast as the dominant incumbent companies in industries. So companies that you've worked with, like Google, for instance, Microsoft, if you look at companies that really aggressively embrace technologies and distributed ways of working, you will see they grow 10x as fast compared to the benchmark of classic industries. Now, this has profound implications for management theory, but also for us as investors, right? Like,
For
so
sure.
uh, are companies embracing the 11 fundamental principles the book identifies that help organizations achieve this 10x growth? And one of the ones that occurs to me is mindset. Who is closest to the future, Adi? The 65-year-old CEO who has his assistant print out all his emails, or the 18-year-old who's on Tinder? Who does all the
Yeah.
strategic planning? Who is most
Mm.
disenfranchised from
Yeah.
strategic planning? Is it any
Right.
wonder we only get incremental change? So how do we
Yeah.
unleash the innovation, the creativity of everyone in our organizations? And it's not with the old hierarchical command and control structure. We have to have new structures, new thinking, new tools. Really,
Yeah.
we need a whole new approach to innovation, leadership, and change in organizations.
I think that in the last few years, I've been working with bigger organizations that were not born digital, let's say that. And you see that the way they think, the way they perceive their position, their role, their roles is is so old-fashioned, and it's very hard to change. The hierarchies are so strict in the organization. They're sure that because they were very successful in the past, like they will be in the future, and it seems like they're very, I don't want to say stubborn, but it's very hard to do that change. Do you see that sometimes with your clients?
Absolutely. And so the very first step in an innovation process needs to be people having a wow experience. Oh my God, I had no idea that there was so much change. I had no idea that if I used ChatGPT, what used to take me 3 hours a day to write pitch letters to clients can take 3 minutes. I had no idea that if I was a doctor, a urologist, and had to write an appeal letter to an insurance company uh, for a procedure that the insurance company has denied, instead of taking 30 minutes, it would take a minute. And that as a $250,000 a year salaried urologist, I see, I get back 150 minutes a week because I'm using this new technology. Um, Really, what happens with technology, if technology is sufficiently advanced, it's indistinguishable from magic. Like, think about the first time you use Shazam. You go,
Yeah.
oh my God, I love that song. I have no idea what it was called. You use Shazam and go, oh my God, I can now find this song from my childhood. So
Yeah.
really what we need to have happen is people have this personal experience with technology that shows them the incredible power it has to make things more efficient, to raise revenue, to mitigate risk, to add more value for customers, to increase customer satisfaction. And then we need to begin using it. And one tool is to have what's called a reverse mentor. So we think that it's the 65-year-olds who have all the wisdom and the young ones who need to be taught. Well, when he was CEO of General Electric, Jack Welch was voted the best CEO by other CEOs, but he knew nothing about the internet. So he had the humility to have some 18-year-olds come in and mentor him on what the internet was. It's called reverse mentoring. So my question to everyone listening is, do you have a reverse mentor? Do you have somebody who's, 18, 20, a Gen Z in your organization who's continually highlighting how the organization could change, adopt new technologies? For instance, in my own company, we use interns a lot. They come in, we work with them. It's interesting. And one intern one time said, look, I make all my bank deposits by taking a picture of the check and emailing it to the bank. And we thought, well, that's great. We don't have to go to the bank anymore. But I would never have come across that on my own. But this is what he did. So that's our standard process in the company now.
Yeah.
Take a picture of the check, you email it to the bank, it gets
Yeah.
deposited. Isn't that
Yeah.
great?
Yeah. I have it in my bank application, mobile application. So if you want to deposit, so it takes to you to the camera and then it takes there. But I guess that sometimes people would say, okay, we can listen to these young people just to hear what's going on, to keep up with the pace. But in order to really change, they usually need to make lots of adjustment in the way they perceive the strategies, the way that people relate, the power relations and dynamics within the company, right? And in some cases, these very, like somebody who's been working with the company for 20 years, let's say, somebody young comes to him and he would say, okay, I really appreciate the fact you could email your pictures, but I understand the industry, I understand our business, I understand our customers. Who are you to tell me anything, right?
So that's a great point. And I have an example. One of my clients is the largest, one of the largest insurance companies in Canada. And they had a view that this has magical properties. Only ink from a pen can bind a new insurance policy because this is magical. And so
Yeah,
30 years of legal and compliance saying only ink can bind a new policy. And then the pandemic hits and nobody can meet anybody and their sales go to zero overnight.
yeah,
Zero. And
wow.
overnight, they began saying, we're going to accept DocuSign. So now think about the impacts on the organization. This poor sales rep had to drive 2.5 hours west of Toronto, meet a prospect, hopefully sign a deal in the 45-minute meeting, and then drive 3.5 hours back in traffic. Now, he would have been using Waze, but still, it's bad. So,
Yeah,
what the heck do you do? Well, when it shifted, this sales rep can now do 8 pitches a day without ever leaving his desk. And so, in fact, sales can go up, not down, because we used technology more intelligently. And we're not forcing our sales reps to be driving in traffic jams 7 hours a day. So the question, though, becomes this 30 years of legal and compliance saying you have to meet face to face and only ink can do it. Was that really a legal problem, or was it compliance and regulatory groups issuing edicts and exerting their political power in the organization? That was the problem. And
right.
so, one of the most important virtues, and I used to represent a guy called Stephen Covey who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen used to say the first virtue of leadership is humility. So, leaders in the organization have the humility to say, we don't have all the answers. We need to create systems and structures that allow for innovation, that allow for the best ideas to bubble up. And where you have a meritocracy, and you've worked with Microsoft as well. In Microsoft, it's the best ideas that should win, not who's the most influential person at the table. So how do we create a culture in companies where it's the best ideas, where it's a meritocracy that drives innovation, not political power?
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I've been working with companies that are so old-fashioned sometimes. It's been even hard for me to work with them sometimes. I'm so used to this very fast-paced startups and technology company changing all the time, and I need to change the way that I think when I work with them. Because sometimes things that look obvious for me is not that obvious, and you have these discussions, very, very long discussions. And politics you find everywhere, but it's like more strict politics, right? So it's really hard to handle. So I want to go back to the self-driving car, and you mentioned the energy industry and how would that impact the energy industry, right? So just imagine, the energy industry is mainly related to fuel, right? And more or less most of the energy industry is related to fuel. So what would we have like in 5, 10 years from now?
So this is a bit of a trick question. So I'm giving you a warning up front. What is the largest source of energy in the United States since 1975? And people will come up with
Mhm.
all sorts of answers, but the largest source of new energy was energy efficiency. And people don't realize it, but if every device we have today had the same energy efficiency as 1975, we'd need 2.5 times more energy. to operate our economy. And so it is surprising to realize, but many people are afraid when we bring all the electrification of transportation onto our grid, how's the grid going to cope with it? We have so much efficiency available for us. If our grid got 3% more efficient every year for the next 10 years, so 3% a year for 10 years, and that's not a radical percentage, it meets historical norms, but we need to get really aggressive on it. We would cope with all the energy we're going to need for electrification. So the answers are here. It's just they're not being adopted across the board and as aggressively. So it's easier to focus on new energy supply as opposed to efficiency. There are so many examples. Dell Computer used to have its PCs on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because the IT department would push out virus updates and patches at night. Well, now there's software that turns all the computers off in the entire office and then wakes them all up at 3 a.m, patches them, tests them, puts them back to sleep, and then brings them up at 7 a.m. before people come into the office. That initiative was saving $50,000 a year for free. So, or the fact that General Motors had the escalator in its head office running 24 hours a day, and yet there was nobody there in the office at 2 a.m.
Hopefully.
So hopefully, so there are just so many simple solutions. I bought a Prius in 2004, and if every vehicle in America had the same fuel efficiency as my Prius, the US would not have had to import any oil from the Middle East. And so, at one point it was spending trillions of dollars in balance of trade payments on importing oil, when really it was an energy efficiency problem with the mindset of Detroit auto executives. So there is so much that we can do, which is not yet being done. We're just scratching the surface of efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. If we're taking AI into the equation, for sure, lots of the processes that are slow right now, or it takes time for people to manually adapt them, could be so much faster. So you're not worried with the fact that we would have more people and then more consumers and then more energy consumption and more cars. I could say, like in Israel, during these 3 years of the pandemic, we had so many additional private cars on the roads that we have such traffic jams right now in Israel. And we don't have public transportation that is so good. It's just you cannot like reach anywhere more or less during like 3 hours in the morning and about 5 hours in the evening, and that's it. It's all stuck.
So that will drive changes, for instance, in remote work and working from home and hybrid work, because a study here in Canada showed that if you're allowed to work from home by your company here after the pandemic, it's worth $18,000 every year pre-tax income, because you don't have to have a car, you don't have to waste time in traffic jams, or you don't need a bus pass or whatever. So we're seeing the evolution of work. And in North America, people are saying, I want to work on my terms. I don't want to spend 200 hours a year in traffic jams commuting to or from work. That's 5 work weeks every single year of my life is stolen by traffic jams. And there's no joy in that. So even if you listen to tapes to learn a new language or something.
I listen to podcasts and I talk over the phone, so for me it's like fun, but not that like I don't need 5 weeks for that. Even I really love talking, it's like too much for me.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I showed my age by saying tapes. We don't have
Tapes,
cassette tape. Hey,
cassettes,
kids listening out there, we don't have cassette tapes anymore. We have
yeah,
podcasts. So I recommend
podcasts.
you listen to Invincible Innovation.
Oh, thanks. Actually, when I go and like just listen to things, I always love to listen to things that I'm like when I go to events or listen to podcasts, I usually don't listen to things that are my profession because I feel that I need to elaborate the way that I see the world. And if we're talking about innovation in general, you need to know so many things in the world, so many things that are not related directly to your position, your role, your company, whatever. And I see that with AI and the fact that you could reach any type of content and media so fast, you could elaborate yourself in the way that you perceive the world so easily. So you don't need to know exactly what are like when I was a kid, it was very important to go, study something which is very specific. And now when I see my kids, I don't even know what is important for them to learn and be educated on.
Well, we are so fortunate because we have Wikipedia, we have Khan Academy, we have YouTube. People can watch this podcast as well as listen to it afterwards. We have so much education that is free and available. And this new report from the World Economic Forum, of course, shows that data scientists and AI experts are rapidly expanding fields. So, if your kids are excited and interested by data and AI, this is going to be hugely expansive areas.
Yeah,
But we're going to need people in every discipline. And I really like your philosophy of going to many different conferences. We need to have or be able to make these associations between different industries, different practices, different ways of working. That is actually a huge advantage of creating interesting ideas for innovation, understanding different industries. And so I believe in a liberal arts education, studying many different subjects.
right. I think that because in the past you need to be very specific with with what is interesting for you. You need to know exactly and to be a very specific expert in what you're doing. And now when we have all these technologies and now AI, which are doing most of the things that we've done, many of the things that we've done, so much better than us, faster than us. What is the advantage of us human beings in this, I know, world in general? So I think that we need to really relate to what makes us human and what makes us really understand the world and not only relate to things in the world or to do any type of actions on the world or to calculate or to think, right?
So AI and technologies automation will automate processes that are dull, dirty, and dangerous. And typically, these are processes that already exist. What is important for the humans are to focus on innovation. In other words, automation will make efficient that which already exists, where innovation is about creating entirely new things. So it's
Right.
not going to be an AI that creates blockchain or cryptocurrency. It's going to be humans who have algorithmic knowledge, who are
Mhm.
cryptographers, really interesting, uh, but who are innovative and creative. So we're going to have this blend of both efficiency and innovation. And we need both in organizations. We need to be more efficient. So that's applying technology to make our current processes more efficient. But we're always going to need people because it's only people who are innovative about creating the new ways of working, the new products, the new services.
Yeah. So we're almost done with time, and I have like two more questions, but I will start with only one. What's
Okay.
your number one tip for leaders today?
Well, we've talked about one thing: always be thinking, always be understanding, challenging your mindsets, always be exposing yourself to new ways of thinking. And search far and wide. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So, look at Waze 10 years ago in Israel. Look at Waymo in Phoenix, Arizona, to understand what some of the implications of autonomous vehicles, and AI are going to be on the transportation industry. Like, you have to actually research and dig and find these things, and then go and understand them, experience them yourself. And this is something that's important: experience. So I remember the guy who invented the minivan was working at a company, and they did all these focus groups with a minivan, and people said, no, it looks terrible. I like my station wagon with that fake wood paneling on it. Like, why would I want that? People don't understand something really until they use it. But once you have a family and kids, and you have to strap them in child seats in the back, once you have a minivan, you go, oh, this is so much easier. Both doors open, it's at a higher height. I can get in and out. It takes all the hockey gear for the kids. So it's only when you use something that you really understand the benefit. If you're just looking at it theoretically or in pictures, you go, no, I that. Oh, that looks ugly.
Yeah.
So all the focus groups said, no, we don't want a minivan. Or another example, in my jurisdiction here, we never allowed shopping on Sunday. And you'd have these polls, 89% of people oppose shopping on Sunday. It was religion played an impact on this. And then the laws changed. And then you go back to those same people, and they'll tell you the only day I shop is on Sunday. So we don't even know what it is we really want. So really innovative companies have to create methodologies, techniques, tools to understand unarticulated needs, those needs that consumers have that they can't even tell you they have, and then create products and services to meet those unarticulated needs.
Yeah. So you mentioned being humble, and I would say humble and curious, to have this open mind all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the last thing would be, where could people hear more about you and your work and contact you, Jim?
So jimharris.com. So www.jimharris.com. I'm on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn, on Twitter. So at Jim Harris. Every year I go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. I go to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I go to Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. So I'm always looking at the intersection of technology and leadership and management on organizations. So any of those points of contact, look forward to hearing from people about this podcast.
Hey, I'm so happy to have you here. It's been so interesting and insightful and fun to talk with you. So thank you, Jim, for your time.
Ooh, well, Adi, it's been so fun for me. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about what I do, go to invincibleinnovation.com. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.